Okay, we're recording to the cloud. All right. Just let a few more folks in the waiting room. We'll get started in 1 minute, only 3 minutes late. Not bad for CMI. All right, I don't see anybody else in the waiting room. Do you, Nyamka?
I think we can get it started.
All right, let's get going, folks, because I know it's a Saturday, and I am so grateful that all of you have logged in today to spend some time with us and to learn a little bit about our process as we consider introducing some form of in-person learning back at CMI in the current pandemic. I want to sort of give sort of a high-level overview of where we are, talk a little bit about the process today and where we are in our process, explain why we're going through our process, unlike jumping to a decision like many other schools have done. And then we'll talk about some of the data we've already received that is part of our equation as we think about whether or not to return to in-person. And we'll also talk about the additional data we're going to get in the next week so we can give you a rough idea of when we're going to feel comfortable enough to make a decision about whether it makes sense from a health and safety standpoint to invite some children back into the building. And then at the end, we are going to open up for Q&A. Like I said, if questions come up during the conversation, there's no formal presentation, so we're clear. I'm not going to show you a slide deck today. This is a conversation, town hall style. But when we get to the Q&A, you can, the best way is probably drop it in the chat and I can read it out to us. If it's something that you feel needs a little more nuanced or more explanation, you can raise your hand and we can call on you. But the chat's better because then we're recording this. And if we miss anything, later we can send out the answers in our FAQs, okay? Everybody good to go? All right, I really want to go through this quick because I know it's Saturday and we all have things we want to do. So I think the most important thing for me to share with you guys today is we've developed what we call a set of non-negotiables. These are the lens through which we look at the decision about whether or not to bring students back into the building, students, staff, and families back into the building. I think it's really important that we're explicit about this because as you all are probably aware, the mayor kind of dropped the bomb on everybody a week ago, including DCPS and many DCPS employees, saying that DCPS was going to come back in person. And a lot of other charter schools, maybe not a lot, a handful of other charter schools very quickly sent something out to their families saying, we're coming back to, or we're going to wait till next year. Not to say they didn't do their due diligence, but I feel like our due diligence and the kind of thing we're doing here at CMI needs to be as transparent as possible. Obviously, you can't be in every single meeting we're in and have every single conversation. But as I've always said, as we have facts, we are going to share them with you. And as we move through the decision-making process, we're going to bring you along in the process and ask for your input. The same way we did with strategic planning, we're going to also do it here. So let me tell you what our 6 non-negotiables are that as a staff and the leadership has agreed to here. The number one is clearly the most important one, the health and safety of our community. We have a saying here, which is you can't teach sick kids. So if we create the risk and increase the risk and children get sick or families get sick, we simply can't do our jobs. And we would be horrified to think that we would contribute to that potential increase. So we are going to always, always, always keep the health and safety of our students and our community, our staff and our families, first and foremost in our mind. What that means is we might run against the political pressure. We might run against these economic arguments, which some of which are valid, some of which are a little specious, but it doesn't mean we are going to do what everybody else does when everybody else does it. Both the mayor and the deputy mayor of Education have reaffirmed that as a charter school, we have every right to make our own decisions. And we are now the mantle of responsibility has been handed onto our shoulders to make sure we make those decisions. So our first priority is health and safety. Our second one I've already mentioned is transparency. We're having this town hall. We're going to have another town hall next week. We'll have another one about that following Saturday, and continue to communicate as long as it's worthwhile for you all and there's interest. We want to make sure you know what we're considering, what's moving our levers as we think about what's best to educate our students. Our third priority is we are going to prioritize our neediest students. What I mean by neediest, it's not the best term, and we're still sort of thinking the best term, but we are going to focus on students for whom the virtual or the at-home learning platforms just simply aren't working. So those are going to be students that might be regressing academically. It's probably going to be a fair number of special ed students and our English language learner students, because there are many more difficulties in accessing an online platform for families like that and for students like that. We're not going to just say all of them. We are definitely going to collect data, and I'll talk about the kind of data we're going to collect soon as we come up with the list of families that we might invite back. Number 4, and this one's a little controversial in the sense that, again, a lot of schools that made snap decisions decided all early childhood needs to come back as soon as possible. There's a belief that isn't necessarily founded on data or experience, at least at CMI, that our younger students can't access and are not participating. Our attendance information shows, and our teachers' observations tell us that our ECE children are actually engaging very well, better than anybody expected. So being an early childhood care or early childhood education student doesn't necessarily mean you're the first to come back. We are a school that goes from pre-K 3 all the way up to 8. So we have a population of 540 students to look at what their needs are. And so unlike a lot of schools where that's the first group they're going to bring back, it's a priority, but it's not our number 1 priority. Our 5th priority is we have decided that if we bring anybody back before next calendar year, it's going to be less than 50 students. We've looked at some of our initial data. We've looked at some sort of qualitative data around students we think need the most support based on conversations with teachers and our educational leaders. And it looks like that's a pretty realistic number. We've run it through our operation systems. We've run it through our safety and health systems. We feel like that's a number we can begin with. And so what we're kind of looking at is we are now in all virtual. Then we're looking at that maybe late this fall, some kind of pilot type program where we've identified the kids who need the support the most. We bring them back and get them some additional supports. We understand if our systems are effective or not. We figure out what staff are willing to come back. We slowly build confidence in both our systems and our education program and for our staff to look at sometime next calendar year, either developing the hybrid program that we were talking about in the spring and over the summer, or some other type of program which has a larger number of in-person students and across the whole spectrum. But initially, again, it's a big safety concern. We figured 50 seems about the right number or less. And then the last, and additionally, these are all equally important priorities. We are going to base any decision on data. That is why we didn't decide last week when a lot of other schools pulled the trigger. That's why we're having this conversation, because this is going to be a data point for us. We have our survey that went out, and we'll run through some of the highlights of that went out to the families today, or over this past week. We're going to be collecting assessment data next week. There's ongoing CDC data and health data coming down the pipe, which changes on a regular basis. And I'll talk a little bit about that later as well. So we are going to constantly be basing our decisions on data. And I guess it's not quite a non-negotiable, but I want to be very clear. We're not going to force anybody to come back. And that applies to staff and to students, right? Even if we feel like your student needs additional supports and virtual is not working, but if the family judges that the health risks are too great, we obviously will respect that decision. We'll figure out other ways to accommodate that child. What we need is to get the data so we figure out what children need additional accommodations. Likewise, and I've already said this to our entire staff, and we're going to say it again next week, and we'll say it again when we do our staff survey next week, we aren't going to force you to come back. This is not like DCPS and other charters are doing where it's either you come back or you take leave. That's not how CMI operates. That's not how we take care of our community. That's not how you focus on our number one priority, which is health and safety. So those are our 6 big non-negotiables, which are going to guide all the work we're going to do throughout this process. Let me talk a little bit about where we are in the process. I'm sorry I'm unloading a lot of information, but it might answer some of your questions up front, and it might give you a chance to ask some more nuanced questions or for us to engage in a good dialogue. As I mentioned, we are in a process. We've taken a very careful and cautious approach to this, again, because of safety. We have begun collecting hard data, including the staff or the family survey. We're also going to do a staff survey. We're going to look at our MAP assessment data, which begins next week. And so by the end of next week, we should have good data for all of our students. We're going to be looking at something called ECBM data for our special ed students. So our related service providers and our inclusion teachers have been collecting that data already for us. We're going to be looking at access data, which is for our English language learner students. We now have nailed down our enrollment, and I am incredibly pleased to announce that we are more than fully enrolled. We had projected, and it was approved, that we would have 539 students. We have 540 students fully enrolled. When I say fully enrolled, I mean they've done all the paperwork and they're coming to class, which is phenomenal, because I think some of you may recall a few weeks back, there were 20,000 students in the DC public school system, meaning DCPS and charters, who hadn't completed the enrollment process. That's now down in the lower 1,000 or 2,000 range, but a lot of schools, especially in the ECE world and special ed and L world, are under-enrolled at this point. A lot of that has to, I think, to do with family anxiety about re-enrolling, or folks just waiting out the pandemic. But I can say we are fully enrolled, and I'm just really proud of that. Some of the highlights from being fully enrolled, as I mentioned, it's 540 students. 61 of them are English language learners. That 61 is broken out over 4 access levels, and we will be focusing on the lower access levels as we think about bringing families back. We have 120 special ed students enrolled in our school. Of that 120, 8 of them are in non-public placements. That means they're in a private school that the public system pays for. But we are still legally mandated to monitor their progress and make sure that they're learning and that they're not denied a fair and appropriate public education, or what's called FAPE. Among our special ed students, we kind of have this interesting U-shape, meaning we've got a lot of level 1, which is sort of the lowest level of need, and we have a fair number of level 4, which is our highest level of need. So those are kids who might be in a resource room, or get a lot of pull-out hours, or get a lot of support in a classroom from a dedicated aide or something like that. But again, my universe there is a lot more focused now, so we can really drill down on what kids in that population might be doing well, might not be doing well. So I'm really pleased to announce that. What I'd like to do now is give some very quick highlights of where we are in the family survey. It is open still, and you can see Jen Andruzzi just dropped in the chat the links to the survey. I think we've had, and I'm going to pull it up and start sharing my screen with you all. So give me a second here, because I've got multiple monitors that I have to negotiate. And then I have to go back to this monitor to click share screen. Okay. So I don't get to see your beautiful faces anymore, but I hope you can see my screen. Can everybody see it? Can someone give me a thumbs up? And is it big enough that folks can read it? All right, so we've gotten, oh, this is fantastic. We've gotten 199 responses, which is great, because we have approximately 420 families. We're actually trying to nail down that number. Yes, we have 540 students, but many of our families—
We're just seeing your desktop. We don't see the survey.
Oh, you don't see the survey? Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Hold on. That's weird. So you don't see this screen. Okay. Huh?
We're seeing a sand mountain.
A sea and mountain. That's
A
not—
sand mountain, your desktop, it looks like.
Yeah, that's weird. All right, I'm gonna slide this down then back to, if I can. Is that better? Still no?
There we go.
Is it there now?
Yep, there we go.
I'm sorry, guys. My dual screens are not working. So I'm gonna be flying blind. I like this. All right, can you see it now? Is it big enough for folks to see? You should see pie charts. Okay, so based on this, as I said, we've got 199 responses so far. We would like many more, because this is what we feel probably under 50% of our families have responded. Our rough estimate, and we're drilling down on this number, because no one really actually tracks this number, is how many actual families we have enrolled versus how many students we have enrolled, because we're judged by number of students, obviously. But we feel it's about 420, and I should have the actual number from our registrar soon. They just have to back into it in a strange way. But that said, if you haven't filled out the survey, do so now, do so after this call. If anybody's with the CFAs on this call, please put it on the CFA website. We'll run it on social media again, because the more information we get, the better. So I want to show you some of these and just talk briefly about them. The numbers might have changed a little bit because we've gotten a couple more responses. But I think it's important to see here in this first one, you can see my mouse moving around, and the blue area is basically that's our percentage of essential workers in a household, or families that cannot work at home. So whether you're an essential medical worker, emergency worker, or something to that effect, or you have a job that requires you to be out of the home. Surprisingly, our population is only 27% at this point. That's a little lower than we thought it was going to be. One of the prioritization areas that a lot of schools are looking at, including us, is do essential workers need some in-support, sort of custodial type care to let kids come back to school earlier? So that's a factor we'll continue to consider. But I thought that was interesting, where 70% of our families can still support their children at home. How many children is interesting, but I don't think it's relevant to our conversation today. So I'm going to scroll down through a few more. This just breaks it down by grade levels. Here's one that I find really interesting. This is sort of the comfort slide. The question is basically, and I'll actually read it out loud. When you think about COVID-19 pandemic and the public health situation in Washington, D.C., how comfortable are you with any of your children returning to Creative Minds for in-person classes in 2020 before winter break? So roughly, because I put comfortable and very uncomfortable and comfortable together, it's about 60% of our population who've responded so far are not comfortable having kids coming back to school. That's a pretty big shift from when we were surveying over the summer. Over the summer, it was much closer to 50% thought in-person was the way to go. So I think part of that is it was under 50%. It was between 40 and 50%. Lower in June, a little higher in March. But we're going to continue to watch this one because, again, as I said, we're not going to have anybody do something that they're not uncomfortable doing. What I also think is interesting here is with 23% of this is unsure. Typically, in these kind of situations, the unsures end up falling into the uncomfortable or the very uncomfortable block. So if we add all that together, we're up over 80% of folks who aren't ready today to come back to school or send their kids back to school. What we end up with is about 17%, 16.5 or 17.5% now, because a couple other people have answered, are okay right now, knowing what they know of having their kids come back for some in-person education in 2020. Now this slide sort of puts a different spin on it. It says, if we offered in-person schedules for winter break, would you choose one for one or more of your children? And what this shows is a little bit more people are interested in coming back than they said before. Not surprising, but I think it's still in the right range. So we'll share the survey highlights once we close out the survey next week to make sure you have these same pie charts, and whether we'll drop it in a deck or something like that, we'll decide the easiest way to communicate it. But I think it's important for you to know sort of what the temperature of our community is, okay? I'm gonna scroll down here to another one, which I think is interesting, this bar chart. This is sort of the impressions of virtual learning right now at CMI. This seems to be tracking where the city's tracking right now. A lot of other schools were reporting very similar statistics here. So if you look at this, the You can see blue is very poorly, red is poorly, yellow, orange is not sure, green and purple are well and very well. So we'll clump those together. So that means generally folks are satisfied. Right now, again, the numbers have changed slightly because now I have 200 responses. When I first did the analysis, it was closer to 180. So we have about 57% of our families feel virtual learning is going well or very well. Now, we didn't define well or very well for you, and we're aware of that. But what that tells us is it's not an unmitigated disaster, that kids are engaging. And we're seeing that on our end too, through our attendance numbers, through the participation rates, through our teachers' observations. So that to me is very encouraging. And other schools are reporting about between 50 and 60% of families are reporting that they feel like virtual learning is going well or very well. We do have about 20%, 21% of our families saying they're not sure whether or not virtual school is going well or at-home learning is going well. And in my mind, that's totally understandable because it's our first time. We didn't know what the expectations of it would be. We hope it's better than it was in the spring for our returning families. But right now, I think it's a totally fair thing to say is I just don't know if this is good or bad. And we're trying our best. The part that we're going to focus on as an academic team, and this is the other reason I want to have these kind of meetings with you, so we know, you know that we know, we're aware, is 21% feel like it's going poorly or very poorly. So we're going to be constantly looking at our virtual programming. We're going to be constantly monitoring our teachers, improving our lesson planning, improving how we look at data for students to make sure we make it as best as we can, knowing it will never be good. It will never be perfect because we all know, and this is sort of an unmitigated fact, that children learn best in person. Schools are designed around that. Social interaction is designed around that. But we are going to continue to look at that 21% to make sure we understand better why it's not working well for some students. Okay, I'm going to switch to another quick screen here. This is a piece of data. Oh, see, this is all screwy now. Sorry, guys. I'm going to have to open this and slide it over to my little monitor, which it did not do. Sorry, I apologize. This was working when I did the run through this morning. Slide left, slide left. Oh my gosh. Well, what I'm trying to do, which is not being very successful, there we go. So the data that everybody's looking at, that the mayor's looking at, that all schools are looking at is publicly available. So I want to make sure you all know where to find it. You probably do, but some of you may not, so I'm sharing it now. Go to coronavirus.dc.gov. You will get a daily update on where we stand with our coronavirus measures. And you can see this was from October 14th. So we're still in yellow, which is phase 2. To move to phase 3, all of these things need to go green. You can see which ones are green, which ones are yellow. The ones that aren't colored aren't relevant to that decision. And then if you scroll down, you'll see all of the measures that the city, Department of Health, and all the public educators are relying on to determine whether we go to phase 3. Phase 3 is not what we used to know as normal. It still has restrictions on number of people who can be together. But for example, in a phase 2 restriction, we can have no more than 12 people in a room together, and they have to be 6 feet apart. So a classroom could have no more than 10 students and 2 teachers in it if we use our CMI model, right? So that gives you a sense of the kind of logistics and negotiables we have to deal with. Phase 3, that number may go up. It will be determined when we switch to phase 3. They don't have an actual number yet, but it's likely to go up to normal class size, but with still masks, with social distancing, as many as you can fit in a classroom. The reason they keep it to such a low number is for tracing and tracking. So as we were planning our hybrid type program over the spring and summer, we were trying to design cohorts of under 12 children, under 12 students and adults, and figuring out how to move those bodies around as a single cohort. So there wasn't a lot of intermixing and intermingling. So it isn't a perfect system in the sense that it's like school and you can run around and recess and have lunch with whatever friends you want. It would be much more restrictive, even in phase 2, and likely in phase 3, there'd still be some restrictions. But in phase 2, schools can open. So that's why some have decided to open. And again, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of political and economic pressure to get students in some sort of childcare type situation, or as we call it, school. So I just want everybody to be aware, this is from yesterday. The numbers that jump out to me, actually this is not from yesterday, it's from 2 days ago. This morning's Washington Post, and I can pull it up, but I don't want to go through that whole screen jumping thing again. The numbers tripled in new cases from yesterday to today in Washington, D.C. alone. So we went up over 90. Actually, we went to 89. So we went from 34 to 89, so just under tripling. And we went from 0 deaths to 3 deaths in 1 day. So DC is continuing to trend the wrong way right now. And the national experts are saying generally, and I won't share the data that I shared with my leadership team, but DC currently is one of the 27 states and protectorates and commonwealths that is in the red by national measures, because our COVID new cases are increasing by over 50% each week still. So 10-5 to 10-12, we went from around 30% up to over 60, I think it was 68, 69%. And these are the national numbers reported. So DC is one of the places right now that seems to be trending in the wrong direction. And believe it or not, those numbers are backing out the sort of White House super spreader event that recently happened. None of those numbers are included in the DC numbers. So these are the kind of things we're talking about as a team as we make our decisions going forward. And I wanted to share some of this data with you so you know what we're looking at. I'm going to tell you briefly what data we're going to collect next week, and we will figure out how we're going to share that data with you all too. But we are going to have our staff survey go out, because yes, we may have 70% of our families that say, yes, I want to go back right now, but I need to make sure I have enough teachers to teach kids in person who are comfortable coming back. Because as I said, our commitment to safety and health is that we are not going to force people to do something they feel is too risky. That will be coming down next week. We're going to be having our MAP assessment data coming in next week. So we will have a snapshot of where all of our children are. We spent the last week training our teachers on how to administer it virtually and to do it as honestly, I guess is the best word, as possible, right? To monitor, to make sure it reflects the students' work, not the family's work. So we really know where our students are. We appreciate that it is not an in-school environment and that the adjustments will have to be made. But it is a good data point for us to figure out, especially for kids we've had over time, where they stand. Then I mentioned we have ECBM for our special ed. That is a big qualitative, many touch point type observation made by teachers and both by the inclusion teachers, the lead teachers, the DEAs, the development aides, our teaching assistants, as well as our related service providers for each and every special ed student. So we can see if they are making progress towards their goals, or if in fact they're slipping in this virtual environment, or they're holding steady. So that will be something that will inform our analysis. And again, I've mentioned the access scores, which are 1 through 4 on English language mastery for our English language learners. So that's really what's happening next week. We'll get all that data, we'll meet, we'll talk to our leadership. We won't make a decision that we don't feel like we have the majority of our staff tied on to and supportive. And that probably means we're looking at, in first week in November, we'll be able to come back with some more really hard information for you all about next steps. So whether that's we're inviting 20 students back into the building, they'll start in 2 weeks. These are the safety precautions we're putting in place for it, all that kind of stuff. We should be able to give you a very good picture of that the first week in November, probably for a mid to end of November start for that in-person programming. It is very possible that we may decide, looking at the data, that we're not comfortable, our families aren't comfortable, our staff isn't comfortable in bringing anybody back still. So I just want everybody to know that. And it is also very possible, which we've seen happen in Boston Public Schools, we saw happen in New York City schools the day before they were going to open, Mayor de Blasio decided nope, and stopped the reopening because they saw spikes. So So it is very likely, and we are going to keep that virtual program. That's why I talked about the 21% who aren't satisfied with the virtual program. We're going to constantly be focused on making that better, because we're very likely going to have to switch back into it. Now, we are feeling like our virtual program's getting its legs under it. Kids are attending. Kids who weren't engaging are now starting to engage. Teachers are showing up. Families are showing up. So we feel like we can switch back with a fair level of confidence, because we've done it twice now. But it is something that you all just have to be aware. Even if your child comes back to in person, it may have to switch back to some sort of virtual learning. What we're not going into today, but we can try to answer some high-level questions, is we have a 92-page, I think it's 92 pages, and Craig can correct me if I'm wrong. It's a back to school if we do in-person type plan. And that was designed around our original hybrid concept that we were talking about over the summer. It outlines all the up-to-date CDC regulations, all of our PPE stuff, all of our protocols, how we would separate kids, how we'd manage hallway traffic, recess, the air quality research we're doing. The consultants have made recommendations. We've implemented air filters in every single room in the building already. We're looking at larger HVAC changes, got hand sanitizer in every single corner of the building at the moment. We will be sort of taping off hallways and all that good stuff. Craig can speak to some of that at a high level at this point. We will present all of those details when we ask you all sort of, we would like to invite your child to come back because we feel like they need additional support. Here's a link to all of the safety precautions in great detail. Or here's a link to a deck if you'd rather look at a deck. Just so you know what's going on. We're also talking about doing some virtual videos for our staff and for our families to show what a pandemic safe school would look like. Where the lines are, where the foot marks. If everybody's been to any store, you see they put the little feet marks and where you need to stand, and the arrows up and down the grocery lines and that kind of stuff. We'll put all those kind of things in. Whew, okay, I feel like I've been talking a lot. I really want to stop, except to answer questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Nyamka, who will take us through what's come up in the chat already. And then if need be, we can certainly open it up to sort of hand waves and those kind of questions. And I'm going to mute myself.
All right, so I'm going to dive right into our question. So first question we have is, how do you measure engagement for early learners? And what we're using to kind of track that engagement is, one, showing up to the morning meeting, to those small group sessions, tracking attendance that way. Also through participation in those, not just showing up and maybe having the screen off, but are they like actively engaged during that time? Another piece is we're using is submitting seesaw activities. So we're using those three as our way to kind of gauge what our engagement looks like for those early learning. So when I say that, I'm thinking our preschool, pre-K, K age groups there. Next question we have is number of staff, teachers, administration, custodial, physically there at any given time, school nurse on site at all time. Craig, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. Right now, we have mostly the operations team, Chuck, myself, in the building on a regular basis, following all the protocols of masks and distancing and the like. When we return to school, that will be driven by the number of staff needed to support the number of students that come back in. If we do bring, in fact, bring students back in, the nurse assigned to our school, Nurse Owens, who many of you know, will be back and in the building on a full-time basis. She is, I believe, scheduled to start coming back into the building fairly soon, just to make sure all of her paperwork is in order and start working from the building as well. So yes, we'll have all of that in place if there is a return to the building.
Thanks, Craig. Next question. We have the links to the survey, so if you have not done that, please click on those and submit that as soon as you can. Next question, what, if any, data do we have on coronavirus COVID cases in schools nationwide?
So I'll start with this one, and Nyamka, you can certainly add into it. So the data is all over the place, to be quite honest. It does tend to track some of the states where they've gone back quickly and early. I'm thinking of Georgia, Florida, Arizona, they have ended up having to reverse course and go back to virtual. Their trends are still trying to be teased out of what it looks like. So if it's everybody all back in person, that leads to greater spikes, or is it the smaller sort of hybrid models? The part of the issue is, to be quite frank, is a lot of school districts are doing different things. There's some extreme examples like I shared with Boston Public Schools and New York City Public Schools. I have colleagues that lead schools in Florida where they reopened and they had to shut back down because they had a spike of 40 in 1 week. Part of that might have been because they were suddenly testing people when they came into the building and these were already untested, undetected, or it might have been a super spreader situation. So we are tracking that as much as we can. We're also looking at what other sort of international schools are going through because they were some of the first ones, to where the pandemic hit, but also to start to return. And a lot of models have been sort of writ large designed on what they did in Denmark and in Korea and a little bit in France, where now they're having some issues with spikes and having to close schools back down too, which is why I ended, I guess, with that warning that even if we do bring kids back, it's very likely that at some point we'll have to go back virtual. But yes, we're tracking that because it tends to be more locally transmitted at this point, which is why tracing and tracking is so incredibly important. We focus more on what's going on in DC and the surrounding jurisdictions where our teachers and our families might travel. So that's a big part of what I think we focus on. But it's a good question, Jeff. Like, it is all over the place. And we do look at it, but I will say we're going to focus more on local data than we're going to focus on whatever's going on in California or, and other major big jurisdictions. No one, to my knowledge, has sort of, because of these, no one's done how do I put this? A really solid scientific study of nationwide trends because so many schools are doing so many different things. There's too many variables to make solid, statistically significant statements about what's working, what's not working nationally. Plus, we don't have a national guidance yet that's really coming out. The CDC has given national guidance to school districts, and every school district and every local department of health are coming up with their own guidance that usually uses the CDC as a base and they build on top of it, or some places have totally ignored it. We're trying to do better than what the feds are asking for us. One more thing, then I want you to jump in. All that said, we do have some really strong nationwide partnerships. We're partners with a group called Instructional Partners. They're a national organization that has schools all over the country. I think they have 200 plus schools in their partnership network at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nayaka, but they are both collecting data on what other schools are doing, developing professional learning communities and cohorts for schools to learn from each other, to share information, best practices, how you've mitigated risk, how you've improved virtual learning, how you've done your hybrid scheduling, that kind of stuff. And we work with them every week. We meet with them once a week. We're still involved with all the educational leaders. Every time there's a meeting, all the local education agencies, all the schools, including DCPS, are all part of that conversation. You want to add to that, Nayaka?
Yeah, the other thing I just wanted to highlight is that the schools that are opening, all of them are starting very, very small. Like some schools, like 25 is their max number. And I think that's a way that you can really, that's why we're not hearing those stories in DC where there's high numbers of school closures, because the numbers are so low. So that's why I want to highlight that, because that is something that you may hear, oh, this school's open, this school's open. Yes, but it's a very small number of students that are in those cohorts. So we're just also being very mindful of that, thinking about our space and what we think we can keep students safe. That's why we landed at that number 50, because, thinking about the confines of our school and what that looks like, how can we follow that 92-page document that we want to ensure safety? We feel that we can comfortably do that with 50 students. I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point. Thank you for raising it. As just a point of data on that, friendship public charter schools, which has over 3,000 students enrolled in it, has under 100 kids, or right around 100 kids. They have 5 learning hubs with an average between 15 and 25 kids in each hub. And that's across all their grade levels. So they have around 100 kids out of their 30, I think it's 3,300 students who are enrolled in their school doing in person. So that just gives you a sense of scale. And to Nyamka's point, 50 is not a magic number in the sense of we can't fit more than 50 under the current protocols. We felt like that was a number that was manageable with who we expected to come back and to really test our systems. So to test our staggered entry, to test getting, breakfasts and lunches in the classrooms and all the other hoops we're gonna have to jump through in that 92-page plan. That's sort of a number we felt we could run through that pretty quickly. Oh, did we lose you? We lost Nyamka, so, she's back. She's gone.
I can try and pick up some of the chat here, Chuck.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay. So the next question is, it appears that 1 in 4 families cannot sustain work at home, and about 1 in 3 report that their kids are doing poorly at home. What will it look like for CMI to consider, even prioritize our most vulnerable students, families? Is it developing 2 tracks hybrid, or will majority rule, i.e. works for 75% of our community? I'll start, and then Chuck, if you want to jump in. What we're doing is we have, really made huge improvements and strides in our distance learning. And so far what the survey is showing is that that's working for a majority of our families, which we're excited about. As we think about those students who it's not being successful for, right now we want to prioritize either 1, bringing them in, or figuring out what components of our distance learning program are not working for them so that it can be successful. So it's not a matter of are we prioritizing our, I don't want to say our neediest population versus our full population. We're considering those in tandem, and really identifying, are those kids who are having the most challenges? Are those also our families who need to go back to work? And if that's the case, then that works beautifully. If it's not, then we'll have to figure something out. But it's kind of a lot of different things that we're trying to understand and figure out what's going to work best. And it's hard to kind of pinpoint what's going to be that magic factor that makes us determine one family versus another. But it's kind of a lot of different things that are going to go into those conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer. It's definitely a factor that will inform who comes back. And what we don't have, because we don't have perfect information. For example, we don't know that 1 in 4 are the same as the 1 in 3, right? Because it's an anonymous survey. There may be some crossover, there may not be some crossover. So we just need to be very thoughtful. And that's, again, why we're trying to collect as much student level data as we can and family level data as we can, to make an informed decision. When we do come back to a larger in-person program, as we were thinking about it over the summer, essential workers, where students needed that more sort of custodial aspect of care I mentioned earlier, that certainly becomes a higher priority, I think, when we're able to invite more people back across the overall academic achievement spectrum, I think. But it is definitely a factor. I don't think we don't not talk about it. We're talking about it all the time, actually. So thanks, it's a good question.
Next question. I think I missed when Chuck was talking earlier. If you do invite kids back, yes, we said 50 back to school this year. Will they get in-person instruction, or will they be doing distance learning from school with more supervision help? That's going to be contingent upon what teachers come back. What we're thinking is that it will continue to be, the distance learning that we have. The students who come in person will still be getting those lessons from a teacher who is trained, because we want to ensure that the instruction continues. If we don't have those teachers coming back into the building, we don't want students coming back into the building and being taught from teachers who have not been trained to do that. And so it's really going to depend on who the teachers are coming back. That was another reason why we kind of had these cohorts set up in the beginning, because we wanted students to get used to all of the teachers in those groups, because we really wanted to ensure that if they did have to switch a teacher, they knew who this person was. It wasn't a new person or someone unfamiliar, and we wanted to create that continuity. Next question. I feel uncomfortable that kids probably coming back into the school. I think we need to consider the new spikes, and also winter is coming. I feel safety with the kids at home. That's absolutely something that we are considering. And just to let you know, if we do decide to bring some students back in, it's always going to be an option to families to keep their students at home. We will continue to have a virtual. We're thinking right now, even until the end of the school year, if you do not feel comfortable, just thinking about, I know some families are very concerned about, not having a vaccine. I won't bring my child back till we have a vaccine. We don't anticipate, the whole community having access to that anytime before spring next year. So just know that even if we do decide to bring a small population back, you will always have the option to remain virtual. Chuck, did you have anything else for that?
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, that is a part of our commitment is we will always have that virtual option as long as this pandemic's in place. It's interesting you mentioned the vaccine. Pfizer just announced today that it's going to come 2 months later than they originally thought. They had earlier said they thought it might happen before Election Day because there was obviously a lot of pressure to make it happen. Now they're saying maybe end of the year. So those are the kind of things that are going to continue to inform our analysis, and I suspect your analysis. If you're in that cohort of families that are like, I'm not coming back until I get a vaccine and I know it works. And I'm okay with that. And we're going to make sure we take care of those families as much as we take care of families that may come back. Other questions?
All right, next. Yeah. Thanks for this meeting. Communication in particular has been great. Very much appreciated. You guys are doing a great job. I missed it terribly too. Thank you.
Thank you. We love to be back.
I know. Next up, apologies if this already been answered, but what will PE lunch recess look like? Food, outside, containers be permitted? Yes, all that stuff is still being considered. With the months getting colder, we would hope, if we brought students back right now, we could have them outside for a little bit, but as it gets colder, we want to be realistic around what exactly that looks like. And that's how we kind of landed on that smaller number, because we could, have, 10 students on the top floor, 10 students on that middle floor, 10 in the main hall, 10 on the ground floor, because we really want to consider how do we keep them, the students, separate and away from peers to, mitigate any sort of, spread or risk of, sharing germs. So those things will be kind of articulated once we have, landed on that clear number. But right now, what we're considering, like lunch would be in the classroom. PE, that might be in their classroom. They might be remote watching, Mr. Y or Mr. Johnson doing a lesson, but they're moving in their classroom. They're staying in that room. So a lot of the feedback that we've got from schools is that for the most part, the kids are in one space, which is not ideal when they're at school. So although they're in school, not at home, it does give one transition with coming out of the home, but I don't want families, I'm not going to paint this picture that if they come to school, it's going to look like school as it was before, because that is not going to be the case. And I want to be abundantly clear that it's not going to be like going from one class to see this teacher going to another, because that goes against everything that the health regulations share. And we wouldn't be doing our part to keep your students safe. So we will not be having them, go to those classes, but we will kind of, what we're thinking is now is that they would be able to participate those from, a virtual component. Because if the PE teacher went to cohort A, then cohort B, cohort C, if the music teacher was ever, they would be spreading it to the whole school. And we do not want that to be the case. Craig or Chuck, did you have any additional?
It's a great question, because it's a question we have a lot of meetings about, to be honest, both with other schools and some who have gone back in person already with small cohorts, as Namka mentioned. And they've been very helpful. A lot of them are private schools. So I want to say, The one big observation I have about all of this is I've been so impressed how educational leaders from all the sectors are coming together with the focus of trying to keep kids safe. So we've had private schools advising public schools on how they run recess. You know, they keep kids 6 feet apart. Suddenly the teachers who take the kids out for recess, it's just one class, and they do organized activities. It's not just run around and play tag in order to control contact and that. So we're getting all of that information on a regular, or if not daily basis. And we're taking all that into consideration. So you know, the idea of food in the classrooms, PE in the classrooms, music, virtually, that kind of question. But you know, what I love about these questions is they're the same questions we're asking our colleagues. So it makes me feel like we're not far off the mark. So I appreciate you all very much.
Next question. If some of the teachers will probably be in person, who will be virtually? So even if, say we had, just going to give an example, say we had a kindergarten lead teacher who decided that, you know, she was comfortable being in person with students. So we would have her come into the building. She, there's a couple of things we could do. She could lead her, still be on video and project that out to the students who are virtually and to the students who are in person. So it depends on really like who we have coming into the building, if those in-person kids would be with her, or if they would be in another classroom and still getting the video streaming for her. So we don't want to disrupt the schedule, because I know families have been, gotten used to that, and we want to create that consistency, because we know that works best for kids, given all the different, things that we're trying to manage right now. We really want to limit the amount of disruptions that we're causing. So our thought is that, we would have that teacher, who has been teaching that class, still provide it in a way that it would be able to be pushed out to whether you are in virtual or in person. Will computer iPads be required to bring to class? Our initial thought is no. Now we have enough devices where we could have devices at school, because that just coming back and forth, another reason just to really mitigate that, germ spreading. So if you have a device at home, keep that at home, and we have one at school for you to use. And we're only able to do that because of those small numbers. So that's another reason, like keeping that in mind as we, go through all this planning. Any thoughts on keeping order and following protocols when we return at large? For example, kids who don't follow directions. Yes, of course, that is something that once we bring, like I said, we've identified this small cohort. Once we've brought them in, thought through all these different parameters that we need to ensure that they're safe, on this smaller scale, we can determine, like, were we being absolutely crazy with, expecting all these students to be able to stay in one room all day? And we'll be able to make, minor tweaks and things to our plan, because we realize we are not going back from like 0 to 100. It's going to be a gradual release, and we're going to have many opportunities along the way to make adjustments to ensure that safety continues to be our main priority. And then, going back to, like, for students who, may not be following directions, like that would be a conversation that we would have with families and students up front, like letting them know, we're going to be as understanding as possible, but these are the things that we have to do to ensure your safety.
And just, from a lot of the, sorry. Yeah, from a lot of the conversations we've had with other schools is they are not seeing a lot of behavior mass challenge issues with the kids. There's a lot of reminding that goes on, a lot of reinforcement, but they're being honest, saying more challenges are getting the families and the parents to follow the directions and the instructions around being at school. So
thanks for that, Craig.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's good.
Do you have any updates on when third graders will get Chromebooks? I do not. Chuck, do you have that?
Yeah, that has been pushed out. Again, if your student needs one and they don't have one, we have Chromebooks available. Everyone should have had an opportunity to request one or obtain one. So if they don't have one, they'll get one. But as far as the new tablets, the tablets, or Lenovo tablets rather, that's been pushed out again. So we're now probably not looking until November, December, as we're just victims of a global supply chain issue with every school under the sun ordering the same.
Those are all the questions that we have in the chat. If you want to come off mute and have a question, or
And again, if you want to return to any of these, we are recording it. And we'll capture all the chat conversations too in a text document. And if any of it will enhance our FAQs, which we're updating on a regular basis, we'll make sure they get updated as well, and send that all back out. And we will, just on the communication front, we'll continue to send out the newsletters. We'll share data as we get it. We'll be making sure that we hear your concerns. If you're not comfortable sharing your concerns in this kind of meeting, we are always available via email, of course, telephone. Craig and I are in the building all the time, so you can certainly call the building. I think now the ops team is here, so someone's monitoring the phone all the time, so they can send it up to me or to Craig if we're here. So I just want to make sure folks understand that our #1 priority is our #1 priority. And if you have any concerns around that or any of the other 5 priorities, you just let us know, and we will do what we can to address it.
yeah. One other thing I just wanted to, just came back to me. We will be doing MAP assessment with 1st through 8th graders. We're also going to be doing the GOLD assessment for our preschool, pre-K, and kindergarten students. And those are tests that are done, like assessments that are done individually. So if you haven't heard yet from your teacher or teaching assistant, they'll be reaching out. We're going to be setting up small one-on-one session, because we really want to get some concrete data. And we know that doing that through a device may not be the best for our youngest learning. So that's going to be happening one-on-one. So be on the lookout for that if Monday, if you haven't heard yet from your child's teacher, because we do want that data as well.
Yeah, and that circles back to that question about ECE and sort of our impressions that they're doing fine, but that'll give us more information if it moves them up the priority chain, as it were. Awesome. You guys are amazing. Thank you for giving us your Saturday morning and for really engaging in this. That's so incredibly important for us, because it's easy when you're running a school like this to get so sucked up in the details and the day-to-day that you can forget that you've got a community that you're a part of. And these kind of things, for me, really get me inspired, get me re-energized, make me feel like it's good to hear what some of y'all think we're doing the right thing, and it's good to hear the criticisms as well. So that kind of feedback is critically important. And I love that you're all taking good care of your families and your children, and that kids are showing up to the virtual classes and engaging. So whatever you're all doing, keep it up. We'll get through it. We will get through this, I promise. It's going to be hard and a long road, but we'll get through it. CMI is a strong school.
Yeah, and if you think these are helpful, which it seems like from the chat, Chuck said, we'll continue to have this and share information as we get it. But thank you all, and have a great weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.